Hello.
Hello.
It's us again. Week 3.
Week 3 of the top 10 reasons for failing the driving test. So this is the third week that we've looked at this, and we're looking at the third thing on the list. So just to remind you, we have coming in at number 1 is your junctions observations. Number 2 is mirrors changing direction. Number 3, which is the one that we'll look at today, is control steering. Number 4 is junctions turning right. 5 is moving off safely. 6 is response to signs, traffic lights. 7 is moving off control. 8 is positioning normal steering.
Just tidying up.
9 response to signs, road markings, and 10 is reverse park control. So this is.
I was going to say, if you missed the first 2, just find them wherever you found this.
Yeah.
Just scroll down or whatever up, and you'll find the other 2.
So we are going to concentrate on number 3, which is control steering. Now, my little group of driving examiners that I am lucky enough to have access to have kind of put me right on a couple of things, because when I read this, we had a couple of preconceived ideas of what we thought they were marking or getting serious faults for, and that's not necessarily the case.
No, I was personally quite surprised it's that high up, because quite often when there's a steering fault, there's another input, isn't there, like a speed on approach quite often, and I would have thought that that would go down more than the steering itself, because if you go into a corner and you end up a bit wide, let's say, it's quite often because the car's a bit fast, whether that's be coasting or whether that be braking late or not braking enough or not getting the engine out of the car, and I would think they would go down there, but we will tell us in a minute what they've said, but I'm surprised it is as high as it is, because I can't really remember personally getting a lot of steering faults. I think it's worth clearing up at this point, and people that know us know what I'm going to say now, but it's nothing to do with how you steer.
Yeah.
And that's a very misconception, that if you cross your arms or you palm it or whatever, that's not a fault in the eyes of the examiners, and can't be a fault, as clearly outlined in the DT1. So it's not going to be that they cross their arms or they drove one-handed, unless that causes a problem.
Yeah, it's the outcome.
Yeah, so then there would be a problem. So it's just worth clearing that up. It's not how they steer.
Yeah. So let's see what our little group of examiners have said. They have said that in their top 3 reasons for giving a serious fault for steering / control are these. So, pulling up on the left, and the amount of people who steer or don't steer and hit curbs or even mount curbs, that is absolutely up there in their in their top 3.
See, and I would have thought that'd be a judgment thing, but as we're learning by going through this, we sort of know it anyway, but we're confirming, this is why we're doing all these videos, is it's more the outcome that's the problem. So it's touching the curb that's a problem, which has been caused by too much or not enough steering. Not that they couldn't judge where the curb was, which is probably the real case, but the fault comes down to the outcome. The outcome is they didn't steer, they steered too much or not enough. So it's a steering fault.
Yeah. The second one that they say is what I thought was clearance, but in fact it's been made clear to me that this is not clearance, and they say this is not steering enough to go round parked cars, or steering too early to come back in past parked cars. That's not clearance. Clearance fault is somebody who is too close to the parked cars after they've done the outie bit. So that's the clearance. So you know that classic one. I know you will as instructors, that point where you think, oh, they left it too late, and to actually get out.
Again, is that not a judgment thing?
Well, I think that again, it's the outcome, isn't it? It's the thing that they should or shouldn't have done.
Let's turn the blooming wheel.
The skill might have been judgment, but the physical thing that one needs to do when one is judging is to steer. So that hence
because not particularly want to go back to the list, but anticipation and planning isn't on that top 10, is it?
No, but all of these
judgment,
things,
and they all come into that box, but that box is very seldom ticked. Otherwise, you'd have to be like that big, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. Not that they couldn't steer, that's their judgment that was the issue. And if you look at why people's fail, you can put most things, if not all things, down to some sort of judgment, whether it be anticipation, planning, or literally judging when to steer. They all come into that. So that's the thing to work on as an instructor.
Yeah, absolutely. The third thing that these lovely examiners have said is swan necking. Now, of course, quite a lot of any fault that we look at is often speed related, which includes the planning that we've talked about, planning,
judgment of when to
anticipation.
turn.
Absolutely. So swan necking at junctions where you've passed your point of turn, and more importantly, your steering hasn't kept up to the speed of the vehicle. So it's not necessarily even a speed issue, just the steering wasn't correct for the speed that you were doing. So oversteering or understeering in those situations. So that is what the examiners have said to us. And I guess kind of looking at it from the point of view of, well, I think we did a live chat on this not that long ago about how a fault doesn't start in the car. The fault starts outside the car and then manifests itself in something that people does and doesn't do. And when I think about particularly that top one that they say about steering to come into the left, to pull up on the left, and that is causing steering faults by hitting or even mounting curbs, I think for me, I'm quite often surprised at how often a fairly confident or competent people will catch us out on things like that. And then when I think, by the time you've been driving with the people for 30 plus hours, how often are we actually stopping and starting and stopping and starting?
I was going to say, I think what I was going to say is the lack of practice of actually doing that.
Absolutely.
And they get caught out, and the examiner says, oh, you pull up on the left, safe movement. They panic on that now, rather than knowing that actually that means anywhere within the next quarter of a mile, half mile, whatever. And that is down to test preparation, as we would call it, isn't it? Just getting prepared for what the examiner's going to say, when they're going to say it, that they do have a place in mind, but it's not there. It's what they can see up there somewhere. So that conversation with the pupil, because we will pull them over to a manoeuvre, because we're doing less manoeuvres now, particularly ones on the road, like turning the road, reverse around the corner. We're probably not putting over the pupils as much as we were before, and therefore enough for that pulling up and pulling away from a point of view of an instructor to be treated as a manoeuvre, really, because it has its do's and don'ts and all that sort of stuff. And I think that can be a weakness of not doing that enough, not focusing on that as a separate skill within itself. Maybe.
And when I think about the moving off and stopping that we commonly think of in terms of that first 1 or 2 lessons when we might be moving off and stopping, the kind of speeds that our pupils are doing that at is very different. The skill of being able to move into the left.
And we're not too worried if they go across the driveway or that on those lessons, are we? Because
Absolutely.
just putting away again, you're not
Absolutely.
pulling up to replicate leaving the vehicle. I know this is going off tangent, but I was reading something yesterday about a pupil failed for not securing the car when they pulled up. They didn't handbrake it, neutral it. The reason that's quite important is because they're replicating leaving the vehicle. And they did go through a phase, didn't they? I don't know if you were instructing them, for about 6 months, saying, I'd like you to put up, see if you're going to leave the vehicle overnight. And then people were giving silly answers and saying, I'm not parking here and blah, blah, blah. And they got rid of that. But that's what they're replicating. So just making sure that they understand why they're putting up and putting away as many times as they do. And I know from a part 2 point of view, we're both doing quite a lot of part 2s at the moment, aren't we, for the site and various things, that we'll spend a long time just doing pulling up and pulling away to get that processing correct, so the examiner, the instructors, or new instructors particularly, fully understand all the rationale behind it.
So maybe that's the message, and we haven't talked much about the other two in terms of coming round parked cars or coming back in parked cars and the steering of that. But again, I wonder how much as instructors we control that quite a lot. So think about that in terms of your lessons. Think about the next time that you are with a pupil in the car. You may be, more than you think, controlling just with a hand gesture, or perhaps even taking a wheel and not necessarily making a mountain out of that molehill, and then it goes and shows itself
or just
as an
prompting
issue.
very early, or just have a look at that car, just keep an eye on that car, what you can do around this car, rather than waiting for the big close.
Again, looking at it as a skill in its own right.
And I wonder, because it doesn't come up, does it? The sat nav doesn't come up on that list, how much something like that is affected by the sat nav.
Maybe.
You know, 200 yards turn right, 100 yards turn right, oh my god, and seeing it late and therefore swan necking and that type of thing. So I wonder how much that comes into it.
I'm not sure that the top 10 reasons are necessarily massively different from before we had the sat nav. So
they seem to be the same, but whether it happens a bit more because of that, because I did a sat nav lesson with a part 2 yesterday, and his driving went back to before, worse than he did when he first got in the car for the part 2, because the sat nav just threw him completely off. And that's an experienced driver, and we got in the wrong lanes and were late for everything and all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting. So we never go down as sat nav, but it can be a reason.
So I think the thing that I have learnt from that is that maybe I need to make a little bit more out of the pulling up on the side of the road and treat it in its own right as something rather than something that we just do casually within
when there's an issue
lessons.
or something like that.
Yeah.
And also the pull away and angle, I think we tend to do that maybe only when we've done a reverse park, as opposed to, or parallel park, as opposed to doing it as an exercise within its own right.
Or we do it in a test
because that comes up,
preparation in those
that's
couple
what
of
that
weeks
skimming is, isn't it? Is potentially after they've pulled them up behind a vehicle or meeting situations.
Yeah.
And how much are we helping in meeting situations more than maybe we should be?
Maybe.
Because it's all that all relates to that situation, doesn't it? That's when they're likely to do that, is in a meeting situation.
Yep. So, have a little focus this week and think about steering, particularly in those three contexts, in terms of pulling up on the left, coming too close to a parked car before coming out, or too close when coming in, and the swan necking, and just see what you notice about your own level of instruction, I guess, and your own interventions, verbally, physically, or otherwise, that you might be influencing without necessarily knowing it, or not influencing enough, as the case may be.
I'm going to chuck a pigeon into the cat's ear, or was it the other way around?
Cat into pigeon.
Yeah. Left mirror.
Yeah, we'll
Is that potentially why people are coming too early?
That's
It could be though, couldn't it? Because you see that car in there, you come across, but actually the car's next to you at this point and not behind you. But seeing in that mirror, you're definitely past it. So that could be
well,
one
we
of the
know the whole
reasons.
hands follow eyes thing, don't
Yeah,
we?
absolutely. And just seeing it and thinking, oh, I'm past it now, when in fact you're not past it. So that's just worth considering as well.
Yeah.
There's another video on that if you want to go and dig it out. Okay, is that it?
Yeah, until next week when we'll look at number 4.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.